Microplastics. You've heard about them in passing. They're probably not that big a deal then, right? Well, unfortunately, they're a much bigger problem than you might think. But let's back up a second. What are microplastics? According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA for short, microplastics, like their name would suggest, are tiny pieces of plastic that measure less than 5 millimeters, which is about the size of a red ant or your average drinking straw. These tiny plastic pieces can come from a variety of sources. Sometimes plastic pieces were made to be that way. According to a review conducted through the United Nations, industrial waste is a large contributor of primary microplastics, or plastics that were designed to be that small. While corporations have a heavy hand in microplastic production, consumers can play a part as well. One study from the University of Auckland found that the average consumer uses products with microbeads daily. These tiny beads can't be captured in most water processing plants and end up in lakes, streams, estuaries, and eventually oceans. Luckily, many soaps and face washes containing microbeads have finally been banned in many places, but there are other uses of microbeads that still make their way into our waterways. Microplastics can also come from plastics that have been broken down over time. This happens through a process called weathering, where natural forces like wind, waves, and even the UV rays from the sun break plastic into smaller and smaller pieces. Microplastics can even come from the weathering from washing your synthetic fabrics in your washing machine. Fabrics that are polyester or fleece are common synthetic fabrics, so check that label. And maybe a shopping trip is in order to buy some new, comfier clothing with more natural-based products like cotton. Now that we know where they come from, what's the big deal once microplastics are in the environment? Well, a lot. In the environment, these tiny plastics, depending on their density, will either float to the surface or sink to the bottom. And they can change depending on their interaction with the environment. A process called biofouling can pull lighter plastics down when small animals and plants, termed epiphytes, attach themselves onto the plastic. Once there, toxins can be pulled out of the plastics. Imagine steeping tea in water. It's like that, but bad. These toxins are called persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic substances, or PBTs. These toxins cause damage to developing wildlife. In a study where sea urchins were exposed to varying levels of polystyrene, a type of plastic, their early cells had actually incorporated the microplastics into the developing body. The toxins from these plastics then cause changes to their gene expression and cause parts of their bodies to develop with missing or misplaced skeletal structures. While there is still some data coming out about how these plastics are changing the development of animals and natural systems, it's still largely unstudied. Microplastics start impacting life at the base of the food chain. In marine environments, this is zooplankton such as copepods and amphipods, and in freshwater systems, mostly insect larvae. These little critters are not picky eaters and often eat the microplastics. Larger organisms eat the smaller ones, but to be full, that means they need to eat a lot more. When bigger fish eat smaller fish, there are even higher concentrations of microplastics in them. This is a process called biomagnification, where higher levels on the food chain have much higher concentrations compared to lower levels. This means that there could be even greater effects of microplastics the higher up on the food chain you are. This can even include humans. According to one study from shellfish alone, the average consumer will consume up to 11,000 microplastics a year. And there are hundreds of other sources. Microplastics, according to one study from the University of Minnesota, showed that there are not only microplastics in natural sources, but also in processed things like tap water, beer, and sea salt. There are microplastics in the air as well. To adult organisms in the wild, it can cause a lot of other health problems. Health impacts include choking, internal and external wounds, fake fullness and therefore starvation and impaired feeding ability, blocked digestion, limited predator avoidance and movement impairment, inflamed tissues, and decreased immune response. These impairments greatly reduce the quality of life for these organisms. There is really no escaping microplastics. Every single person is touched by the impacts of microplastics every single day, and it's growing more and more with plastics dominating the markets. Now it's nearly impossible to buy anything without plastic wrapping, from food products to clothing tags. What you can do is start making little choices to help fend off that plastic waste. Buy clothes made of natural fibers. Buy in bulk where you can to avoid individual packaging. Kick the straw and other utensils at restaurants and work on reusing stuff once you're done with it. Together, we can make a difference in the microplastic problem, but it starts with us.